That morning, when I picked up the phone my daughter-in-law had left on the kitchen table, I wasn't prepared for the screen lighting up with a line of text that froze my blood. Daniel Brooks is calling. Daniel, my husband, who had been buried 6 years ago. Before I could even breathe, another message popped up. Thursday, same time, I can't wait to see you. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone, but instead of panicking, I unlocked the device, something I had never done in my entire life. And what I saw shattered every bit of trust I had held on to through 40 years of marriage. And the worst part was, this was only the beginning. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My kitchen that morning was unsettlingly quiet. The autumn sunlight in Colorado poured through the window, washing over the old oak table. The coffee maker kept dripping softly, and the smell of frozen waffles heating in the oven filled the air. Yet the only scent I could perceive was the cold, metallic tang of fear. I stared at the line, "Daniel Brooks is calling," as if blinking would make it disappear. 6 years ago, I had stood beside his grave, listening to the heavy thud of soil hitting the coffin lid. No one returns from that. My heart pounded so hard my ears rang. My first instinct was to set the phone down immediately and pretend I had never seen anything. I grew up in a generation that didn't touch other people's private belongings, especially not family. Hannah is my daughter-in-law. This phone belonged to her, and I, 70-year-old Eleanor Brooks, had never been the type to pry into anyone's personal life. But the message was still there, shining bright on the screen. Thursday, same time, I can't wait to see you. No way, I whispered, my voice cracking. Daniel had died of a heart attack in his basement office. I could still remember how cold his hand felt when the paramedics covered him with the white sheet. I remembered the small funeral at the cemetery outside Denver, the drizzle, the yellow leaves sticking to my shoes, Marcus standing beside me, pale from losing his father. All of those memories crashed back, colliding violently with the absurd text on Hannah's phone screen. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my hands. The iPhone still buzzed, showing the decline and accept options beneath Daniel's name. I didn't dare touch either. I just stood there, staring at the familiar name I thought existed only on a gravestone. The call ended after a few seconds. The screen shifted to the message interface, showing the most recent conversation. I knew I shouldn't do what I was about to do. I knew I was about to break every boundary of privacy I had respected all my life. But something stronger, part wife's instinct, part mother's intuition, pushed me forward. I pressed the home button. The screen lit up, asking for a passcode. 4 digits. Ben's birthday. I had seen Hannah enter that code hundreds of times when she handed the phone to him to play games. My fingers moved almost on their own. The phone unlocked. A soft click sounded in my mind, like the latch of 40 years of marriage being pulled free. The messaging app was right at the top. The first conversation showed only a single letter as its name, D. I tapped it. The newest message was that same Thursday, same time line. I scrolled upward. Last night was amazing. You always make me forget everything. Marcus is starting to get suspicious. We need to be more careful. The old lady doesn't suspect a thing. She just likes baking and watering flowers. The old lady. They were talking about me. It felt like someone drove a splinter straight into my chest. My hand shook visibly around the phone. I scrolled again, Message after message, half-joking phrases, half-serious arrangements, words of longing, all from the number saved as Daniel Brooks in Hannah's phone. But what made it hard to breathe wasn't the content, it was the timeline. I scrolled higher past rows of gray and blue message bubbles. This year, last year, the year before that. I reached the very beginning and my pulse stopped when I saw the first timestamp, 6 months before Daniel died. I remembered that period vividly. That was when Daniel began going bowling on Thursdays with his friends. He said the doctor told him to get more exercise, go out more, be social. I believed him. I packed him a sandwich, joked, "Don't drink too much beer." Now these messages mocked my trust, one line at a time. I scrolled up and suddenly found a photo. I tapped it open. It showed Hannah smiling, her cheek pressed to a man's face. It was Daniel, or at least the face I had slept beside for 40 years. They stood in front of a wooden window frame, pine trees thick in the background. In one corner, I saw a patch of shimmering blue water, a lake somewhere. Hannah held up a wine bottle, mouth open in a laugh. Daniel, no, that man, was looking at her with the expression I once thought belonged only to me. I had never been to that place. We had never vacationed in any cabin with a view like that. Daniel always said he hated the cold, hated forests. Yet there he was, wearing a sweater, standing among pine trees, smiling like a 30-year-old man. Who have I been living with for 40 years? The question crept into my mind, cold as winter air leaking through a doorframe. I swiped to the next picture. This time, Hannah sat on a couch under a thin blanket, and Daniel, or D, sat beside her, his hand tangled in her hair. On the coffee table were ceramic mugs with a floral pattern I had never seen in my house. In the corner of the screen was a tiny line, Pine Hollow Lake Cabin. The phone must have logged the location automatically. Pine Hollow Lake. I had never heard the name, despite living in this state for 30 years. Reality didn't wait for me to catch up. The next photos showed them on a wooden porch, in the snow, in the cabin kitchen cooking together, decorating a Christmas tree. A parallel life I knew nothing about. Each image sliced through my memory, ripping apart every story Daniel had ever told me about another long meeting, poker night with the guys, snowstorm made me late. It's just because she doesn't get me like you do, one message from Hannah said as I scrolled further. She lives in her own little world. Apple pie, church, rose garden. I'm tired of pretending, Dee replied. I saw myself in those words. Apple pies, church, rose garden. I had thought those were the things holding my family together. To them, they were the punchline of a private joke. The sound of a car engine outside jolted me out of the nightmare unfolding in broad daylight. I heard the door, footsteps on the wooden porch. Hannah. She'd come back. In an instant, the numbness shattered. I moved faster than I thought I could. Hit the home button, closed the message app, placed the phone back exactly where it had been, angled the same way. I went back to the sink, picked up a dish towel, and pretended to wipe a plate that had already been clean for hours. The door opened. "Mom, I think I left my phone in here," Hannah called out, her voice as smooth and sweet as always. She always spoke to me in that soft, polite, Midwestern tone, just gentle enough that people outside would say I was lucky to have such a daughter-in-law. "On the table, next to the coffee maker," I answered, surprised that my voice sounded so normal. No shaking, no stumbling. As if I hadn't just read her calling me the old lady in a message to the man using my husband's name. Hannah stepped into the kitchen, her hair tied back, her beige coat still on. She grabbed the phone and dropped it into her purse. Sorry, I was rushing this morning. Marcus had to be at the job site early, and then Ben forgot his homework. She rambled with a smile, the kind where the corners of her eyes crinkle slightly, a detail I always thought was so endearing. For the first time, I looked at that crinkle and saw a crack in the mask. I know, I replied, forcing a smile. It's fine. We all have mornings like that. I'll swing by later with dinner. I have a meeting in town. Hannah said a few more casual things before leaving, her light perfume lingering in the kitchen. As the sound of her car faded, my legs nearly gave out. I dropped into the chair by the dining table, resting my hands flat to stop the trembling. Memories crashed over me. The time Daniel forgot his winter jacket on a snowy night, but insisted he had to meet the guys. The night he came home late smelling like wine, an unfamiliar perfume. The doctor visit he claimed brought good news but left him strangely distant. I had patched all those pieces together into a story. He's tired, he's aging, he needs space. I was the kind of woman raised in church to believe marriage meant patience, sacrifice, and trust. And now the messages, the photos, the Pine Hollow Lake cabin tore it all open. I jolted upright again, this time not from panic, but from something else. The need to know. The need to face whatever monster had been living beneath the surface of my supposedly peaceful life. I thought of Hannah's phone. Now far away on the highway. I wouldn't get another chance to see those messages, but I still had something else. I sat back down, closed my eyes, and forced myself to recall the cabin photo. In the top right corner, a little eye icon. On Ben's iPhone, whenever he showed me pictures of the fish he caught, he always pressed that icon. A little panel popped up showing the location, sometimes even a map. I opened my laptop on the counter, moved the old mouse aside, and typed slowly, Pine Hollow Lake Cabin. Plus my state's name. Dozens of results appeared. Resorts, rental cabins, travel blogs. But among all the colorful ads, one listing made my stomach drop. Pine Hollow Lake, County Road 27, Cedar Ridge County. Cedar Ridge, only a 40-minute drive from our ranch. I stared at the screen for a long time. It felt like looking at a door I knew would destroy everything behind me if I opened it, yet leaving it closed would destroy me just the same. If I didn't face this, I would spend the rest of my life asking, what really happened to my life? In the window's reflection, I saw a silver-haired woman, shoulders slightly hunched, wearing an old apron. For 40 years, I had been the wife in the kitchen, the mother behind the scenes, the grandmother with cookies ready every afternoon. No one had ever taught me what to do when a dead husband rang my daughter-in-law's phone. But one thing was clear. I would not let Marcus learn this from someone else. If anyone was going to protect my son from the truth, it would be me. If anyone was going to face the ghost named Daniel Brooks, it would also be me. I closed the laptop, my palms damp with sweat. In my mind, one thought took shape so clearly it felt like words. I will go to Pine Hollow Lake. I will see what happened behind my back, even if it destroys everything left. At least it will destroy it on the foundation of truth. And that was when I understood. The phone call that morning wasn't just a call from the dead. It was a summons into a part of my life I never thought I would have to face. A place where my husband, my daughter-in-law, and even I were no longer the polite characters we had pretended to be for so many years. I stood there for a long time after deciding to go to Pine Hollow Lake, but my feet carried me somewhere else. Before going there, I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining things. That grief and loneliness hadn't twisted my mind. At least that's what I told myself. And so, instead of grabbing my car, keys, I turned toward the staircase leading to the basement, where Daniel had spent most of his life working. The basement always smelled of old paper, pine wood, and the laundry detergent Daniel loved. Warm yellow light shone over the broad desk that took up most of the room, highlighting stacks of books and boxes of documents, things I usually left untouched because Daniel liked organizing them himself. He always said, "Let me handle the paperwork. You just take care of the garden and the boy." Looking back now, that sentence felt like a locked door I had allowed Daniel to close behind himself. I opened each drawer, starting with the top where he kept his pens. A few ballpoint pens, a black notebook, some unpaid bills. Nothing unusual. The second drawer had insurance files. The same medical records, farm documents, tractor repair invoices. All normal, all ordinary enough to make my unease grow. It felt like the truth was deliberately hiding. Then I opened the bottom drawer. It felt heavier than the others, as if something was stuck behind it. I crouched down and pulled harder. A sharp click sounded. The drawer slid open, revealing a hidden compartment underneath, a false bottom. I forgot to breathe. Inside was a bundle of envelopes tied with twine, several kitchen receipts that didn't match our household expenses, and a stack of papers that looked strange. Some pages bore Daniel's name, others had only signatures with no identifying information. There were receipts from stores I'd never heard of in towns Daniel claimed he never had a reason to visit. When I pulled the papers out, something heavy fell onto the tile floor. I bent down to pick it up. It was a small wooden box, dark brown, simply carved, aged so heavily I had to brush the dust off to see the details. Daniel wasn't sentimental. He liked things clean, open, uncluttered. This little box did not fit him, and that was exactly why my hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photographs. I lifted the first one. My heart clenched immediately. There was Hannah, younger by a few years, radiant, her blonde hair falling over one shoulder. In the picture, she leaned into a man. The man had Daniel's eyes, Daniel's jaw, Daniel's smile. So similar it felt like the floor beneath me shifted. I laid out the second, the third, the fourth. Each captured intimate moments, standing in front of the cabin, dining by a fireplace, laughing together in a small restaurant I had never heard Daniel mention. But the most suffocating detail was the dates, year after year after year. The affair stretched like a film reel with no beginning and no ending. I once believed Daniel led only one life, the one I built with him. His expression when he proposed under the lights at Denver's Square, the way he held me in the hospital after my mother's surgery, the joy on his face when Marcus was born, all of it suddenly felt fragile. Not because I thought he never loved me, but because I now saw he might have lived two lives at once, and I had been given only half. Blinking back tears, I reached the bottom of the box. A folded document lay there. I opened it. It was the ownership certificate for the Pine Hollow Lake cabin. Owner, Daniel Brooks. Status, active. I remembered clearly when Daniel claimed he had sold that cabin. A small property his brother had left him. He said maintenance cost too much, that he had no time to go there anymore. I had believed him. I even felt relieved, thinking he wanted to spend more time with family. Now that certificate sat in my hand like a massive unanswered question. Why did Daniel lie? What was the cabin for? Who had lived there with him? And what truly happened 6 years ago? I kept one photo. Hannah touching Daniel's neck, her eyes looking at him like the world had shrunk to just them. I didn't keep it to torment myself. I kept it so I wouldn't forget, wouldn't downplay, wouldn't allow myself to pretend this could all be a misunderstanding. People forget pain. Evidence does not. I put the box back, returned the documents to their places, wiped the desk so I wouldn't leave traces. As I straightened up, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Marcus. "Mom, you down here?" His voice was low, tired, the voice of a man carrying his family on his back. My heart jolted so hard I had to press a hand against my chest. "Yes, honey. I was just looking for some old tax papers. I think I misplaced them somewhere." Marcus stepped into the room and glanced at Daniel's desk. He had no idea that right beneath his hand was a secret capable of destroying every memory he had of his father. "Did you find it yet, Mom? Let me look for it." He reached toward the bottom drawer. I nearly lunged forward to stop him. "No need, I already found it. Everything's done." Marcus seemed a little surprised by how quickly I reacted, but he just nodded, asked a few questions about dinner, about Hannah's work, then went back upstairs. When his footsteps faded, I had to grip the edge of the desk just to stay standing. My fear wasn't only for what Daniel had done, but for what might happen if Marcus learned this truth in the cruelest way possible. When I looked back around Daniel's room, everything suddenly changed. The chair he used when writing letters, the leather jacket he hung behind the door, the Colorado map marked with his favorite fishing spots. All of it had become props in a play I didn't know I'd been watching. And then a thought, light as a breath but sharp as a blade, cut across my mind. Hannah knew this room better than I thought. The marks on the drawer, the way the papers were arranged, the carelessness of leaving photo metadata exposed. All of it made me certain she had been in here more than once. I didn't know what Hannah and Daniel had shared with each other, but they had clearly shared far more than I ever knew. I looked at the wall clock. The minute hand had just passed the 6. It was barely near 10 a.m. If I left right now, I could reach Pine Hollow Lake before noon. There was no reason to hesitate. No answers were left in this house. I took a long breath, walked quickly up the stairs, grabbed my car keys, and pulled on a warm coat. When I opened the front door, a blast of cold wind rushed in, carrying the faint scent of young pine. Winter in Colorado always arrived sooner than expected, just like the truth I was about to face. I would go to that cabin, alone. Whatever waited for me there, at least I would no longer be living in the dark. I drove out of town, leaving behind the familiar streets leading to the church, the small grocery and the bakery I had gone to for 30 years. The farther I went, the more the landscape changed. Thick lines of pine trees, deep green crowns pressed together along the hillsides, the ground covered with a soft carpet of fallen leaves. The road to Pine Hollow Lake wound through the forest, narrow enough that 2 cars passing each other would struggle. The map told me I had 12 minutes left. I rolled the window down a little. The cold air swept in, carrying the smell of earth, pine resin, and the damp scent of the nearby lake. My heart pounded with each beat, not only from fear, but from the feeling of someone about to touch a truth they had avoided all their life. When the cabin appeared among the tall trees, I braked slowly. It didn't look like an abandoned hideout. It looked cared for. New wooden roof, windows clean of dust, steps swept neatly. A metal wind chime hung by the door, ringing softly whenever the wind passed, a gentle sound that made my chest tighten. I parked the car a few miles away and followed a side trail to avoid being seen. As I neared the porch, I stood still for a few seconds, listening. No voices, no cars, only the rustle of leaves. I placed my hand on the doorknob. The wooden door opened easily as if the owner had just stepped out. Inside was warmer than I expected. Natural light from the windows washed over the small room, a beige sofa, a Navajo-patterned rug, a coffee table with a few old magazines. I stepped in and immediately saw the first sign. A bottle of red wine left unfinished on the table, with 2 glasses beside it. Hannah. And who else? I walked to the wall hooks by the door. A long cream-colored woman's coat hung at arm's reach. I touched the fabric. New, clean. A faint scent of perfume. The same vanilla amber blend Hannah always wore. I opened the small closet next to it. Inside were a travel bag, scarves, toiletries. All the things Hannah carried whenever she left the house. So this wasn't a hidden meeting place abandoned after Daniel died. It was where Hannah was living part of her life. I swallowed hard and lifted my eyes to the shelf above. Something there made me grip the edge to steady myself. A row of men's coats, the exact style Daniel liked, the exact size Daniel wore. And when I leaned closer, the faint scent of the detergent only he used still lingered. I had to push the closet door aside to keep from falling. "Daniel, what did you hide from me?" I froze when I saw a picture frame lying face down at the bottom of the closet. My hand trembled as I flipped it over. The photo showed Hannah smiling brightly, her face glowing in the lake sunlight. Beside her stood a man. His face was familiar enough to make my stomach twist. It was Daniel, but it wasn't. He looked older, his hair more gray, and there was a small scar across his right eyebrow, a scar my husband never had, but the build, the smile, the look in his eyes. Similar enough that the line between the dead and the living blurred. I stepped back, setting the frame onto the chair before my hand gave out. If this man wasn't Daniel, then who was he? And if he was Daniel, then who had we buried? A distant car engine made my heart leap. I rushed to the back door, moving on instinct, like someone running from a ghost rising out of their past. My heart thrashed wildly, my breath ragged. I pulled the back door shut and crouched behind the woodpile. Through a sliver between the boards, I saw a man step onto the cabin porch. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his walk. God. That walk made me want to cry. Each step, each slight shoulder movement as he took off his hat. It was Daniel's. Exactly Daniel's. Every piece of logic inside me crumbled. I was dragged back to the last day of Daniel's life. Or what I thought was his last day. The way he walked down the stairs, the way he straightened Marcus's collar before an interview, the quick kiss he gave me before saying, "I'll be home early." The man opened the cabin door with a key. No hesitation, no fear. I saw the jawline, the broad shoulders, the slight lean to the right. Something only Daniel had, but the small scar on his right eyebrow was still there. Daniel never had a scar. I understood then. I was looking at a man both familiar enough to hurt and strange enough to terrify. In that moment, everything I knew about my marriage collapsed and rebuilt itself into a darker shape. If Daniel wasn't the only one with that face, if there was someone else who looked exactly like him, then I had never truly known the man I married. I couldn't watch anymore. My emotions stormed violently. Fear, grief, disbelief. I stumbled backward toward the trail, nearly tripping as I climbed the small incline. My ears rang, my face flushed like fever, my heart pounding so fiercely I had to press a hand to my chest to keep from collapsing. I got into the car and locked the doors, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I didn't start the engine. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel as my breathing slowly steadied. Each heartbeat felt like a cruel question. Was Daniel alive? Or was I looking at his twin brother, someone Daniel had never mentioned? Or was this some elaborate impersonation to hide something even darker? None of the questions had answers yet, but one thing was clear. If I walked away now, I would never forgive myself. I needed to know. I needed to see the truth from more than one angle, not just through a rushed visit. And so, before leaving Pine Hollow Lake, I opened the trunk and took out a small bag of miscellaneous items. I found what I needed, a compact camera Marcus once bought me to record my garden. I would return to the cabin that night. I would place a camera where it could capture everything that happened inside. The truth was no longer something I feared. It was the only thing I had left. The next afternoon, when the sun dipped behind the pines, I drove back to Pine Hollow Lake with a newly purchased hidden camera in my coat pocket. I had spent all morning finding the smallest, clearest, longest, lasting model, one that could expose the truth without anyone knowing. The salesman asked if I planned to film wildlife or neighbors, and I only smiled. If he knew what I was going back to record, he might not have dared sell it to me. At the cabin, I turned off my headlights from a distance and walked along the tree line just like before. But this time, I wasn't trembling like prey being hunted. I had a purpose, and that gave me strength. The back door was the same. The hinge clicked softly unless lifted just right. I stepped inside, taking a steadying breath to push past the warm scent of wood and lingering human presence. I chose a spot on the bookshelf to place the camera between two paperback novels. The angle was wide enough to capture the living room, the front door, and part of the hallway. I adjusted it a few times before snapping the camouflage cover into place. Then I connected it to my phone and checked the signal. The light blinked once, then stayed steady. Perfect. I left the cabin while a faint gold edge of sunlight still touched the treetops. As I closed the back door, my hand hesitated. A small voice whispered, "After today, your life will never be peaceful again." I shook it off and walked quickly to the car. Peace had been taken from me years ago. I just hadn't realized it yet. The camera reported movement the next morning. My phone buzzed 3 times in a row, enough to nearly spill my coffee. I opened the screen, my heart pounding like I'd sprinted a mile. The image appeared. The cabin door swung open. Hannah walked in, hair tied back, black coat carrying a small suitcase and a bouquet of fresh flowers, white chrysanthemums, the same kind Daniel used to like arranging in our living room. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Hannah set the suitcase on the chair, then adjusted the table runner as if she had been the homeowner for years. She moved around the room, picking up small things, opened a window to let the breeze in. Every gesture was so natural it couldn't be mistaken. She lived here, not just visited for an affair. An hour later, another motion alert came through. I tapped the screen with such force I nearly hit the wrong icon. The image of the man entering the cabin made my blood run cold. That walk, that light gray t-shirt Daniel used to wear while working in the yard, that familiar gesture running a hand through his hair while taking off his hat. Hannah ran to him, hugging him like she had found the love of her life. They kissed, deeply, passionately, the kind of passion Daniel hadn't shown me in at least 10 years. He said something. Hannah laughed, placing her hand on his chest. They stood close, familiar, effortless. Then he reached up and brushed her cheek. Exactly the way Daniel brushed my hair when I had a headache in 1998. They held hands and walked into the bedroom, disappearing from view. I shut off the screen. If I didn't, I would have thrown up. My kitchen suddenly felt foreign. The floor tilted, my spine chilled. I braced myself on the counter, trying to breathe, but each inhale felt knife-like. If that man wasn't Daniel, then why did he have all of Daniel's habits? And if he was Daniel, why had he chosen to live with the woman who destroyed our son's marriage? More importantly, what had he done to vanish from our lives? But no matter the answer, one thing was certain. I couldn't sit back anymore. I had to confront them. I was just about to call Hannah when my phone rang. Marcus. His voice was cheerful. "Hey, Mom, can I come for dinner tonight? I want to ask you about Dad's tax files. And, have you heard anything from Hannah? She's been acting strange." I swallowed the pain rising in my throat and answered as calmly as I could. "Sure, honey, come over. I'll make your favorite." I didn't know how to talk to my son while holding a truth that could reduce his heart to ashes. But I also knew I couldn't let Marcus fall into this nightmare before I understood everything myself. All day, even while cooking, my eyes kept drifting toward the phone. No more alerts. The cabin was quiet while I played the role of calm mother for Marcus. He talked about work, the neighbors, the little boy across the street learning to ride a bike. I nodded, smiled, asked the right questions, all while feeling like an empty shell. My mind stayed in the cabin. The shutting door, Hannah's laughter, that man's silhouette cutting into my heart with each image. I walked Marcus to the door and watched his car disappear behind the maple trees. As the gate closed, my face finally collapsed. I went upstairs, grabbed my coat, shoved my keys into my pocket. I knew what I was about to do wasn't safe, wasn't wise, but I had no other choice. If I didn't face them now, I never would. I drove into the night, following the same road to Pine Hollow Lake. Tonight the cabin would no longer be just a hiding place for secrets. It would be the place where I forced the truth to show its face. I pulled over on the hillside, turned off the engine, and let the night swallow every sound around me. Pine Hollow Lake stretched out in the distance, a dark mirror reflecting the pale silver moonlight. Every step I took down the dirt path made the pine needles crackle beneath my shoes, as if the forest itself were warning me, "Turn back." But I didn't turn back. I had gone too far to still fear the truth. As I approached the cabin porch, I heard music drifting from inside. Soft, slow, deep as an old wound. Frank Sinatra. "The Way You Look Tonight." The song Daniel used to play whenever our family had dinner on the porch. The song he played the night before Marcus's wedding. The song he once said meant, "You're always the most beautiful to me, even when you're angry." Hearing that melody now made my heart clench painfully. I drew a breath, raised my hand, and knocked. 3 knocks. Not loud, but enough to tighten every muscle in my chest. The music inside stopped abruptly. Then footsteps. Slow, heavy, as if the person inside were trying to guess who stood out there. The door opened, and I saw him. It took me several seconds before I remembered how to breathe. That face, that jawline, those eyes, that familiar furrowed brow. All of it was Daniel, but also not. The man standing in front of me was older than Daniel had been at the time of his death 6 years ago. His hair was grayer, and there was a thin, sharp scar across his left eyebrow. Daniel had never had a scar there. He froze when he saw me. His eyes widened. Not the polite surprise of seeing a stranger, but the horror of someone who had just seen the ghost of his own past. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice, dear God, almost identical to Daniel's, but slightly deeper with a faint rasp Daniel never had. Before I could answer, Hannah appeared behind him. She was wearing a pale blue shirt, the exact one Daniel had worn on our 30th anniversary trip. I recognized the stitching on the cuff immediately. I was the one who'd repaired it when it frayed. Hannah saw me and her face turned bone white. "Oh my God," she gasped. She stepped back, gripping the door frame as if afraid she might fall. I stepped onto the porch, my voice calmer than I understood, as if the shock had drained me of the ability to tremble. "Looks like I'm interrupting." The man moved to stand protectively in front of Hannah, as if shielding her. That gesture made my blood heat, not from jealousy, but from sheer wrongness. What I was looking at was a replay of a life I thought had been buried 6 years ago. "Who are you?" I repeated, this time without flinching. The man swallowed, inhaled slowly. "I'm Richard Hale," he said, eyes still fixed on me. "I am Daniel's twin brother." The air around me exploded into silence, a single sentence capable of erasing 40 years of marriage. Daniel had no siblings. I answered firmly. "I married him. I knew his family from top to bottom." Richard lowered his head, not arguing, not denying. "You knew what he wanted you to know. Daniel was adopted as a baby. I wasn't. We were separated at birth." I stood still, as if nailed to the wooden floor. Daniel was adopted? Daniel hid that from me? Why? Dozens of questions pounded inside my skull. Richard continued. "Daniel found me 6 years ago when he was diagnosed with a severe heart condition. He needed information about his biological family, and I was fighting a malignant blood disorder. Daniel saved me. He donated marrow. He's the reason I'm alive." Hannah was standing upright now, but her face remained ghostly pale. She looked at me, her eyes shimmering. Not with remorse, I saw that clearly, but with fear. "I know you saw the phone," Hannah said, her voice trembling. "And yes, I did have an affair with Daniel." The words cut like a knife, even though I had already known the truth. Hearing them from her mouth made the pain double. "For 6 years after he died, you still messaged him," I said coldly. "Or at least, someone using his number." Hannah glanced at Richard. Richard looked down, his hands tightening into fists. I stepped into the cabin without being invited, my anger far past the point of politeness. "Explain all of it. I want to hear everything." Hannah clasped her hands together, as if trying to hold herself steady. "Daniel, before he died, he was planning to leave you. Leave Marcus. Leave everything. He wanted to abandon his life and start a new one with me." I went numb. Not because Daniel cheated. I had already survived that shock 3 times over these past days, but because he wanted to leave my son, leave his grandson, leave everything that bore the name family. Richard added, as if wanting to clarify every broken layer. Daniel planned to fake his death. He wanted me to take his identity and disappear with Hannah. He said he couldn't stand the life he was living. "But he died for real," Hannah cut in, her voice cracking. "Right in my arms. The heart attack came sooner than he expected. The plan wasn't carried out, but the consequences still remained." The cabin fell silent. No wind, no lake sounds. Only my heartbeat, heavy, violent, as if my entire past were collapsing beneath my feet. Finally I spoke, slowly but razor sharp. "So that means I mourned a man who had already planned to leave me." Richard closed his eyes as if he too felt pain from the truth. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know until it was too late." Hannah didn't apologize. She just lowered her head, like someone who knew her guilt could no longer be hidden, but who lacked the courage to show true remorse. I looked at them, the 2 people standing in the life Daniel intended to choose instead of mine, and I asked myself, what value did 40 years of marriage truly hold? But I didn't cry. I had used up all my tears during those days watching the camera footage. Here, in the cabin where Daniel had lived his second life, all I had left was cold clarity. And I knew tonight was not the night all truths would be revealed, but it was the night I would begin reclaiming the life those people had tried to erase me from. I stood in the cabin's living room, hearing their words as the air thickened around me. Part of me wanted to cover my ears, to stop absorbing any more of it, but I had come here for the truth, and truth is never gentle. Hannah spoke first. Her voice was small but steady, as if she had finally set down the boulder crushing her chest. Daniel had several heart attacks before he died, she said, unable to meet my eyes, but he hid it from everyone, from Marcus, from you. I didn't know if I was shaking from cold or rage. Daniel, the man whose blood pressure pills I set out every morning, hid a heart condition? He said he just needed to get through a few more months, Hannah went on. He said, when I disappear, no one will have to take care of me anymore. I saw Richard close his eyes, as if hearing a memory he hated. Disappear? I repeated, each syllable falling heavy onto the wooden floor. Yes, Hannah whispered. Daniel's plan was to fake his death, or at least vanish from this life. You have to understand, he believed he was about to die from heart disease anyway. He didn't want to wait for it. He wanted to go out on his own terms. The room spun in my vision. Daniel wanted to die with Hannah beside him, not me. But Hannah kept talking, compelled by a force I couldn't understand. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. That day, he had worse symptoms. We were discussing the details, timing, method, transferring the insurance money to Richard. And then he collapsed. Hannah brought her hand to her mouth, her voice breaking. I panicked. I didn't call 911 right away. The world dropped out from under me. I had to grab the back of a chair. Richard spoke, his voice low and rough. Hannah said Daniel wanted to go quietly, that he had accepted his death, but he looked at me, his eyes painfully honest. You and I both know that doesn't justify not calling for help. You let him die, I whispered, my lips so dry it hurt to speak. You let him die. Hannah sobbed, choking on her words. I thought if I waited just a few more minutes, what Daniel wanted would become true. I was wrong. I didn't understand he still had hope to live. I turned away. I couldn't look at her another second. Then Hannah's voice softened. After Daniel died, I remembered the plan he'd mentioned about Richard receiving the life insurance and leaving with me. So I called Richard to tell him. Richard's hands tightened until his knuckles whitened. I refused. I was sick, still in treatment. And that plan, my God, what kind of morality would allow me to do that? I told Hannah not to contact me again. I looked at him, and for the first time, sensed something genuine in his tone. Hannah continued, but then Richard recovered. A strange miracle. After 2 years, he was completely healthy. Daniel always said something about the twin bond between them, that they could save each other, and it turned out to be true. Richard rubbed his forehead, exhaling heavily. After I got better, I went to see Hannah, to thank Daniel for saving me. And then we continued the relationship that had been left unfinished. No Daniel, no marrow donation, just two people who had lost too much and clung to each other to survive. I felt like I was standing inside a story that had never included me. Hannah wiped her tears and looked straight at me. We didn't want you to know, or Marcus, or little Ben. Daniel had already caused enough damage. We just wanted to start over. I let out a laugh, hollow, sharp, more brutal than anything I could have said. Start over? I repeated. After tearing my family apart from the ground up? After sleeping with my husband, then with his brother? After letting Daniel die on a wooden floor instead of calling for help? Hannah bit her lip, her face pale as ash. Richard stood still, like someone accepting judgment he couldn't escape, even though he hadn't committed the worst part of the story. I turned and walked toward the door. No one tried to stop me, maybe because they knew nothing they said could fix what they had done. The freezing night wind struck my face as I stepped off the cabin porch. In the darkness, Pine Hollow Lake lay perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the truth inside me, shattered, desolate, tangled in betrayal, regret, and an emptiness without a name. Daniel betrayed me while he was alive, and even his death was a betrayal. I walked back to my car, my chest tight as if someone were squeezing my lungs. The night was pitch black, but I could still see the path, because every cell in me was burning with a pain too sharp to look away from. I opened the car door, sat down, and clutched the steering wheel. "Daniel," I whispered, "what did you do to us?" I didn't start the engine. I just sat there. In the quiet night, the cabin in the distance was still lit, warm yellow light, soft, peaceful to the point of cruelty. And I, the woman who had shared 40 years of life with Daniel, walked away from it with a heart so broken I no longer recognized myself. I drove home through a night that felt endless. The only thought that flickered in my mind, not Daniel, not Richard, was Hannah. Her face when she confessed, the way she dodged responsibility, the way she stood in that cabin wearing the exact shirt I had once stitched for my husband. A part of me wanted to do something truly cruel, something that would make her understand what it feels like to have your heart shattered by betrayal. I imagined slipping a bottle of strong sedatives into the Merlot Hannah always drank every night. Just a small amount, enough to knock her out, make her lose control, make her shake with fear, but not endanger her life, just so she'd know my pain could leave marks too. The thought slowed my breathing. A coldness spread from the back of my neck down my spine. I, a woman who once believed in forgiveness, was thinking about revenge. But then the images of Marcus and Ben came to me, so clear it felt like the two of them were sitting right there in the back seat. Marcus, with those eyes always waiting for me to smile. Ben, my grandson, who always wrapped his arms around my leg when he got sleepy. If I hurt Hannah, even just to scare her, everything would come back down on my own family, and those two innocent souls would bear the consequences in her place. I let my hands fall from the steering wheel and leaned my head against the seat for a long minute. No, I couldn't turn myself into someone like them, but I also couldn't let them live peacefully as if nothing had happened. A few days later, at our usual family dinner at my house, I returned with the calmest appearance I could manage. I made roasted chicken, steamed corn, and pudding, Ben's favorite. Marcus and Hannah arrived on time. When Hannah stepped into the kitchen to help me set the plates, I glanced quickly at her face. She avoided my eyes, something Marcus never noticed. During dinner, Marcus cheerfully talked about work. Ben ran circles around the table with his toy car in hand. Only Hannah was unusually quiet. Every time I opened my mouth to ask something, she jumped like someone who had brushed against an electric wire. I set my glass down and smiled as if I were just making small talk. "Are you two doing well lately, Hannah? Work, marriage, everything still going smoothly?" Marcus kept scooping corn for Ben, not noticing anything, but Hannah froze. Her eyes locked onto mine with a panic only I could see. I curled my lips, not a smile, but a warning unspoken. I know everything. That was the message I sent her with my eyes, and she understood, immediately. Her face drained of color, her lips quivered even though she tried to force a weak smile. "Yes, we're fine," she said softly, staring down at her plate like she wanted to crawl into it. My trap wasn't poison. It was the truth lying silently between us. After Marcus took Ben to bathe, I stood, wiped my hands on a towel, and said quietly, "Hannah, help me in the kitchen for a moment." She followed me, every step like she was walking into an interrogation room instead of my vanilla-scented kitchen. I turned, leaned against the counter, and looked straight at her. No yelling, no crying, no anger. That calmness made her shake more than any scream could. "I'll keep the secret," I said, each word measured and clear. "Marcus will never know. If you don't make him find out—" Hannah opened her mouth but couldn't produce a sound. I continued, "But if my son suffers one more drop of pain because of you, just one, I swear I'll expose everything. I have photos, videos, confessions. I'll let Marcus see all of it himself." Hannah stepped back, her lips trembling violently. I'll leave Marcus," she whispered. "I promise I'll leave, quietly, without hurting anyone, I swear." I looked straight into her eyes, not to judge her sincerity, but to make sure she understood I was no longer the gentle, easily wounded woman I used to be. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Power. Not the power to destroy someone, the power of someone who holds the truth, someone who can protect her family from the worst, someone who decides who gets to remain in this story, and who must leave it. When Hannah lowered her head, avoiding my gaze, mumbling her promise to disappear quietly, I realized that for the first time since Daniel died, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the one holding the scale. And that feeling, painful as it was, still made me stand taller, breathe deeper, and know that the rest of my life would be guided by no one but myself. A month passed slowly, as if time itself were watching to see whether I would keep my promise. Hannah avoided me completely but kept her calm facade around Marcus, until the night she walked into my house, sat across from me, and announced in an even voice, "I want to divorce Marcus, because we no longer share the same views." I looked at her, saying nothing, just observing. That calmness that was too practiced, those eyes trying to appear innocent while always avoiding mine, the way she lifted her glass without her hand trembling, as if everything were a calculated decision. Marcus didn't have that kind of calm. When he heard the news, it was like watching someone fall from a rooftop onto cold concrete. His shoulders collapsed instantly. The same way Daniel looked 30 years ago when he learned he'd lost his job. But Marcus didn't yell, didn't blame, didn't demand answers. He just repeated one sentence, his voice cracking. "If that's what she wants, I have to respect it." I wanted to hold my son, to tell him the truth, to tell him none of this was his fault, that Hannah's heart had belonged somewhere else, to someone else, for a long time. But I had to grit my teeth. The promise I had made in that kitchen still wrapped around my chest like a binding strap. I would keep the secret, if she didn't hurt Marcus further. Divorce, painful as it was the least harmful outcome. Hannah moved out in just 3 days, never looked back once, left nothing behind except a neatly folded divorce paper on Marcus's dining table. What shocked me wasn't that she left, but where she went. She didn't move back to her parents' house or to a temporary place. She, moved to Arizona with Richard, a pair built on secrets, a pair connected by Daniel's death, a pair whose very existence was enough to tear my family apart. Ben was different. He was only 6, his eyes wide with confusion as he watched his mother pack. "Mommy's gonna work far away, Grandma?" he asked, hugging my leg. I looked at Marcus. He bit his lip before answering gently. "Yes, Mom has to work somewhere new, but she still loves you." Half true, half false, more painful than the whole truth. I held my grandson, feeling his heartbeat against my chest, and reminded myself that every decision I made was to protect these small souls from the shock adults had created. Marcus tried to be strong, but I saw the emptiness in his eyes every morning when he held his coffee. I comforted him with familiar phrases. "You'll be okay. Everything happens for a reason." But inside me, a storm roared. I was the only one in the house who knew the truth, and the only one who had to carry it like a sharp stone lodged in my heart. Some nights, sitting alone by the fireplace watching the flames flicker, I asked myself, did Daniel ever truly love me? That question would never have an answer. On Daniel's Memorial Day that year, I prepared white roses and cleaned his photo in the living room, just like I did every year. But that morning, when I opened the door, I saw a large wreath sitting on the steps. From Richard, with gratitude. I froze. A message of gratitude left at my door. The home where Daniel lived with me for 40 years, where I cried for him more times than I could count. That wreath was a blade twisted straight into my chest. Richard hadn't entered our lives as family. He entered through a secret that shattered my marriage. He had no right to leave anything on my doorstep. Not on the day I remembered Daniel, not after everything that had happened. I carried the wreath to the backyard. I set it in the fire pit I used to burn fallen leaves every month, and I lit it. Flames rose, swallowing each petal as if devouring the past I'd clung to for too long. The scent of burning flowers drifted into the air, sweet, scorched, bitter, like a cleansing ritual. I watched until the wreath became ash. This is the line. I told myself, I will not let anyone use Daniel's name to hurt me again. A few weeks later, Marcus began to heal. He fixed up the porch, took Ben to basketball practice, started going to the gym, things he had never done while living with Hannah. I watched my son slowly regain his smile, a tired smile but real. Then one day I saw him hesitating at the door, holding a bouquet of white daisies. "Mom," he said softly, "I met someone. Claire. She teaches at Ben's school." I saw the light return to his eyes, a light he had lost for too long. "That's wonderful," I said, stepping forward to straighten his collar like I did when he was 8. "You deserve a new happiness." He laughed shyly. I smiled too, but deep inside, one worry remained. Marcus was rebuilding his life. On ground I knew held a buried secret, a grave named Daniel, and everything he had done. I could only hope that secret would never come back one day to ruin the life Marcus had pieced back together with his broken heart. I had believed, or hoped, that once Hannah left Marcus's life, everything would fade into the past, that I could box the secret away, place it in a mental drawer, and close it. But secrets never die. They only change shape. And its new shape was Hannah and Richard's strange desire to appear publicly as a new family. I learned this when Hannah texted me a week before Ben's birthday. "We would like to come. For Ben. I hope you understand." I understood. I understood that they felt no shame, But I also understood that if I refused, Marcus would start asking questions. And I had promised to protect my son from the cruel truth. So on Ben's 7th birthday, when I saw a black SUV pull up in front of the house, my heart dropped to the floor. Hannah stepped out first, lightly made up, looking dignified in a way that felt false. Richard stepped out right after, tall, composed, polite, and so much like Daniel that I had to grip the back of a chair to keep myself steady. It didn't matter how many times I reminded myself that he was not Daniel. My body still reacted as if seeing a dead man return. During the party, Richard behaved like the perfect gentleman, courteous, kind, tactful. He bowed his head slightly to me. "Mrs. Brooks, thank you for letting us come." I nodded, swallowing down the surge rising in my chest. That voice, deeper, rougher, but still carrying Daniel's tone. If I closed my eyes, I could imagine myself standing in front of my husband again. I did not allow myself to close my eyes. Marcus looked at Richard a few seconds longer than usual, then laughed. "You look familiar. Have we met somewhere before?" My entire body froze. Hannah, standing behind him, visibly flinched, but Richard, with a calmness that was almost frightening, simply smiled. "I just have one of those common faces." Marcus laughed, not thinking anything of it. He was busy organizing the ball toss game for Ben and the neighborhood kids, but I couldn't breathe normally anymore. When it was time to cut the cake, everyone gathered in the front yard. Ben ran around with his birthday hat, smiling bright like a little sun. And then, as if by instinct, he ran straight to Richard. "Do you know how to ride a horse? At school, I saw on TV some people riding horses on a big ranch." Richard smiled, bent down to Ben's eye level. "Of course. I used to live on a small ranch with—" He hesitated. "With someone very special." In that exact moment, my heart went wild. Daniel used to teach Marcus to ride horses at my parents' small ranch. That story was supposed to be a private memory of our family. Ben tilted his head. "Grandpa taught Daddy to ride horses. You knew about that too?" I stepped forward, almost by reflex, and cut him off. "Ben, come here and blow the candles." I couldn't allow any thread to connect Richard to Daniel, couldn't let Ben sense that frightening familiarity. Children notice things far sharper than adults realize. When the party wound down and guests began leaving, I was cleaning up the plastic plates when Hannah walked over, standing by the kitchen door, her eyes fixed on the floor. You're still keeping your promise, right?" she asked softly. I set the tray down and looked straight into her eyes. No anger anymore, just a cold exhaustion. "I have kept it," I said, "and Marcus still doesn't know anything." Hannah bit her lip. "Please, don't say anything. We just want to live peacefully." I let out a short, almost humorless laugh. "Peacefully? After everything that's been done?" She bowed her head, not arguing. "Just, please don't ruin our new life. We need a chance to start over." I didn't answer, because I knew, and she knew, that the plea had no foundation. Nothing built on deception can ever be peaceful. As they were leaving, Richard turned back and gave me one last look. That gaze, those eyes shaped like Daniel's, cut straight through me like a reminder. I'm still here. I still exist in your family whether you want it or not. And I understood something more clearly than ever. My family would never escape their shadows. Not Hannah, not Richard, and not Daniel, the man who ruined his own life and then left the pieces in someone else's hands. The secret I carried, the secret about Daniel's death, the betrayal, the planned escape, could no longer stay quiet. It was like a wild beast trapped in my chest, silent, dangerous, and just waiting for the smallest crack to break loose. As I watched their car disappear behind the row of pines, I whispered to myself, "How long until that secret climbs out of its grave?" I knew the answer. Soon. Very soon. Because ghosts never really leave. They just stand behind us waiting for us to turn around. Ben began asking the first questions one afternoon that seemed peaceful. He was sitting on the living room floor building a tiny ranch out of wooden blocks, with a horse stall, a fence, even a little well he made using a bottle cap as a roof. I was folding towels on the chair when Ben suddenly looked up, his big round eyes full of a strange realization. "Grandma, did you know Mr. Richard before?" My hands froze mid-air. "Why would you ask that?" Ben shrugged, kept stacking the blocks, but his voice stayed uncertain. "Because Mr. Richard looks like somebody. I don't remember who, but a lot. Like, I've seen him before." My stomach dropped. A 6-year-old doesn't lie the way adults do. They just speak whatever their mind can't make sense of. And the familiarity Ben felt, that was exactly what I had feared. I forced a soft smile. "Maybe you're just confused, Ben. Grown-ups all look a little alike." "You know that." Ben tilted his head, thinking. "But he talked about a ranch, just like Grandpa did when he told Daddy stories." I felt as if someone had tied a rope around my chest and pulled tight. Even though I'd prepared for months, I didn't expect the day to come so quickly. The day a child started noticing pieces that didn't belong together. I put my hand on Ben's shoulder and squeezed gently. "Don't worry about that, sweetheart. Grown-ups have lots of complicated things." But my words were too vague, too shaky. Children can feel fear even when they don't understand it. As soon as Ben ran out into the yard, I closed the kitchen door and called Hannah. She answered after just one ring, her voice already laced with worry. "What happened?" "I warned you," I said bluntly. "Ben is starting to ask questions about Richard." I heard her swallow hard on the other end. Richard, just needs to keep some distance. He just needs to stay low-key, that's all." But Hannah reacted instantly, her voice tightening. "No, we've decided. If anyone asks, Richard is a distant relative of Daniel's. They share some similar traits, a simple, easy-to-follow story." I nearly let out a bitter laugh. "Another made-up story? Another disguise? You really think that will fool a smart child?" "It's the only option," Hannah said, sounding cornered. "We don't want Ben shocked. We don't want Marcus suspicious. Richard needs to be present in Ben's life in the least messy way." "The least messy way," I repeated, my voice turning cold. "The least messy way is for both of you to disappear from our lives." Hannah didn't answer. I heard her breathing hard. Finally, her voice dropped to a fragile whisper. "You know that exposing this truth would destroy everything. Marcus, Ben, everything would fall apart." I closed my eyes, and in that moment I saw clearly where my limits were. The truth, even when right, could become a blade cutting straight into my family. Ben was too young. Marcus was already too wounded. I couldn't take another disaster. So I answered only with a sigh. "Do whatever you want. Just don't let Ben get hurt." On the other end, Hannah's voice trembled. "We'll be careful. Ben just needs time to get used to things. And later, if necessary, we'll tell him a small part of the truth." I immediately pushed back. No more half-truths, no more layers. Every new lie weighs everything down even more. But Hannah whispered, "Sometimes that's the only way to keep going." I hung up before I said something cruel. That evening, I sat alone on the porch, watching the streetlight glow against the patches of leftover snow from last week. The December air was crisp, carrying the scent of burning wood from the neighbor's chimney. Ben was asleep on the sofa, hugging the brown teddy bear Daniel once gave Marcus. But instead of feeling peaceful, I felt hollow enough to hear my own heartbeat. I had lived long enough to understand one thing. Nothing is more dangerous than a big secret brushed by a child's hand. Children don't fully grasp things, but they feel and they remember. Small questions grow into big ones over time. I looked at Ben sleeping, his little eyebrows slightly furrowed as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. In him, I saw the future. A future where he would have to live inside the web of lies adults spun around him. And I, the grandmother who loved him more than anything, was the one holding the main thread of that web. The sadness sat heavy on my chest like a stone. I stroked his hair gently and whispered, "I'm sorry, Ben. I'm trying my best to keep you out of the storm, but sometimes even I don't know where the storm is coming from anymore." Then I leaned back, staring into the thickening darkness outside the window. The secret, the one about Daniel, about his death, about the betrayal and the guilt, was no longer something I was hiding. It had become a living thing, a shadow following every step of my family. And the day Ben asked his first question, I knew the road ahead would no longer be smooth, not because I didn't want to tell the truth, but because once spoken, the truth would destroy everything good left in this family. All I could do was hope one thing, that I would be strong enough to keep everything from collapsing, at least until Ben grew up and could handle the truth we had buried for far too long. The family birthday party that year happened on an early spring afternoon, when the air still held a bit of chill, but the sunlight was warm enough for everyone to sit in the backyard. I hung little flag banners along the fence. Marcus blew up balloons, and Ben ran around with his paper hat tilted to one side. Everything looked like an ordinary family preparing for a special day. If you didn't count the fact that the two guests about to walk through that gate were the ones who destroyed my family, and the living shadow of Daniel under the name of someone else. When the SUV stopped, I inhaled so deeply my chest hurt. The door opened, and Hannah stepped out first. She was dressed more neatly than usual, a cream dress, a light jacket, the gentle look of a woman who had stabilized her life. Right after that, Richard stepped out, not hiding, not avoiding, but with the posture of a legitimate partner, his hand resting lightly on Hannah's back the same way Daniel had supported me for so many years. I heard Marcus's voice behind me. "Mom, they're here." I had to fight not to wince when I saw Marcus smiling as he greeted them. It wasn't his fault. He didn't know anything. He just saw two adults trying to behave civilly after a divorce. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked over with the most artificial smile I had ever worn in my life. "Hello, both of you. Thanks for coming." Richard nodded, trying to soften his expression, but there was still something in his presence that made it hard to breathe. Too much like Daniel. The stance, the eyes, the restrained smile. Even if I told myself 100 times that this was Richard, not Daniel, my body still reacted through memory. I had to pretend this was the first time we were meeting, as if I hadn't stood in that cabin at Pine Hollow Lake, facing him in the dark, listening to him reveal secrets that shattered my life. Ben didn't sense any of the tension. He ran to hug Hannah, then turned to Richard. "Mr. Richard, let me tell you, I got the best sticker in class today." Richard bent down, smiling warmly at him, and in that moment, I saw the two of them, Richard and my grandson, as if they were standing inside a family picture I would never allow to exist. I had to turn away to catch my breath. The party went on as usual. Marcus grilled meat, Claire came too, bringing a homemade apple tart. Everyone ate and chatted. Only I was aware of every movement Richard made, as if each of his steps threatened the fragile stability I had tried so hard to hold on to. Ben laughed the whole time, and Marcus felt relieved because everyone is getting along again. He didn't know that this harmony was just a new coat of paint covering a wall that was already split wide open underneath. When the weather started to turn cold, Marcus patted Richard on the shoulder. "Hey, stay a bit. I want to talk about Ben's summer classes." I froze. It wasn't about the summer classes. It was about Richard staying, about letting a man with Daniel's face discuss my grandson's future, right inside my home. "All right," Richard replied, his voice light as the wind. Hannah smiled with gratitude, and I clenched my teeth until my jaw throbbed. While everyone was clearing the table, I went into the kitchen to brew a pot of tea. Richard followed me. No rushing footsteps, just a quiet presence that raised goosebumps along my back. I set the kettle on the stove. Richard stood near the doorway, hands in his pockets. "We need to talk," he said. "I don't think we have anything left to say," I answered without looking at him. "Yes," he said slowly. "I want to do the right thing." I let out a short, sharp laugh, like a shard of glass. The right thing? Now? After everything that's happened? Richard fell silent for a moment. "You may not believe me, but I never meant to destroy your family. Daniel, he pulled me into this. I only followed because I owed him my life." I turned around, looking directly into the eyes I had stared into for 40 years, even though the man standing there was not my husband. "A life debt doesn't give you permission to take someone else's family," I said. "It doesn't give you permission to stand here in my kitchen and talk as if you were the one forced into this." My voice was low but sharp, like a blade slicing through every excuse he had. Richard lowered his eyes. "I know everything I say means nothing to you," he whispered. "Yes," I answered, "because you represent the thing that killed my family. Not because you wanted to, not because you meant to, but because you exist. That's all." The air grew heavy like stone. Richard stood still for a long time, as if weighing every breath. Finally, he said, "I'll stay out of your way. I promise. I'll only show up if Marcus asks, or for Ben, if it's truly necessary." I looked at him, my heart cold as winter ice. "I will protect my children and grandchildren," I said clearly, "whether the person standing in front of me is the second version of my husband or not. I will not let any secret, any face destroy their lives again." Richard nodded, his eyes carrying something between sadness and surrender. "I understand," he said, "and I'm sorry." I didn't say anything else. I just turned away and poured the tea as if the conversation had been between two strangers. But when Richard left the kitchen, I placed my hand on the counter just to stay steady, because even though he had promised to stay out of my sight, even though he had admitted defeat, even though he was trying to fix what he could, I knew he was still the dark shadow hanging over my family, a quiet but persistent presence, a reminder that in this life, sometimes we don't escape the past, we only learn to live beside it. And that night, after the party ended, after Marcus and Ben hugged me goodnight, after Richard's footsteps had faded past the gate, I still heard inside my chest a small, thin vibration, like the surface of Pine Hollow Lake when touched lightly. Nothing ever truly ends, not with secrets like ours. Not when the man wearing my husband's face is still somewhere out there. The next 2 years went by in a strange rhythm, fast enough that I couldn't count the days, slow enough that each month carried a new layer of healing for my family. After a storm, people don't go back to who they were. They only learn how to stand on the broken pieces. Marcus was the first to stand up. He married Claire on an autumn afternoon in a small garden behind a church. A simple, warm ceremony, not flashy, nothing like the grand wedding he once dreamed of with Hannah. Claire wasn't stunningly beautiful or dazzling, but she brought something my family had lacked for a very long time: peace. As I watched Marcus hold Claire's hand under the string lights, his eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years, I understood. True happiness sometimes comes after pain, so deep you think you'll never recover. Ben grew faster than I could keep up. He still occasionally mentioned Richard, usually when talking about horses or watching ranch shows on TV, but deeper questions never came. Children sometimes have an odd intuition. They sense what shouldn't be touched, and I, who once feared every potential question, was now grateful for that instinctive silence. Hannah and Richard moved even farther away, to a small town near the New Mexico border. I didn't know how they lived or whether they were happy starting over. I didn't ask. Partly because I didn't want to know, partly because I understood that distance was the best thing for all of us. Everything remained steady. Until that winter morning when I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. The handwriting froze my heart instantly. Richard. I went into the kitchen and made a cup of tea, my hands shaking so much the water spilled over the rim. Then I sat down, opened the envelope with a letter opener I used only for special occasions. The letter wasn't long, but every line carried a weight I had avoided for 2 years. Mrs. Brooks, if you are reading this letter, then I believe I have found the courage to send it. I do not write to ask for forgiveness. I know I do not deserve it. I only want to say what Daniel never said. Not when he was alive, not in his final days. He did not know how to love in the way a person should love. I stopped reading, just to keep my breath from breaking. Richard continued. Daniel lived his entire life in fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being misunderstood, fear that his true self would be seen by the people he loved. That is why he hid me, hid his past, hid even his own weakness, and that is also why he hurt you in ways he probably never understood. I close my eyes seeing Daniel's face, the familiar wrinkles, the hands that once held mine while we watched TV in the evenings. The sense of loss returned, but no longer sharp, just the softened echo of an old sorrow. Then came the most unexpected part of the letter. If things had been different, if we had grown up together, if I had met you before Daniel, maybe we could have been a real family. You are strong, kind, and deserving of a love that is whole. I'm sorry for showing up at the wrong time. Sorry for carrying the face that hurts you so much. I set the letter down. I didn't cry. The past 2 years had taught me that tears don't heal. Only action does. I tore the letter into small pieces. I took them to the backyard where the fire pit still bore traces of the wreath from that day long ago. The scraps curled in the flames, shining for a few seconds before turning black. That was right. Not keeping it, not storing it, but letting it leave my life as ashes. As I watched the ashes rise, the sun began to set beyond the western horizon. The sunset cast a warm orange glow over the yard like a soft blanket wrapping around a heart that had weathered too many storms. And I realized, after everything, I had survived. Not survived Daniel's death, but survived the truth about him, a truth I could never speak aloud, not to Marcus, not to Ben, not to anyone. But sometimes, things we cannot say still leave our chest in another way. That night, I opened the old wooden box that held the journals I'd kept since I was young. I took out a blank one and placed my pen on the first page. "I am writing this story," I wrote, "not so the world will know, but so my heart can be lighter." And I began, line by line, paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter. The story I had carried for 2 years like a stone I couldn't set down. I wrote about Daniel, about Richard, about Hannah, about the things that would never be spoken aloud, and about the journey that carried me through the pain to stand here on this porch, at peace in my own way. When I finished the last sentence, I looked out the window. The sunset had faded, leaving a gentle blue-violet sky. I exhaled, long and soft. I wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. I just needed to learn to live with it. And if you're reading these lines, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching from? Have you ever carried a secret you could not say, just like I did? If you have, leave a comment below. No details needed, just a small sign that you're here, walking beside me through this story. Thank you for spending your time listening to my journey, from the painful fragments to this quiet moment of peace. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and stay for the next ones, where we, people who have been hurt, learn to walk again in the light. I am grateful for you, truly.